Champions aren't just made on the court, they're made on the farm too. North Carolina pig farmers put in the time and effort to raise animals the right way. They protect our air and water, produce safe, high-quality food, and contribute $10 billion a year to our state's economy. Like great athletes, great farmers know that doing things the right way is the only way. North Carolina pork, raising the bacon, raising the bar. Welcome back into another edition of Time Out, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show, here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Let's get right to our starting lineup this week. He is the 38-year veteran of covering ACC basketball, an entrepreneur, author, and a North Carolina practicing attorney, and two-time North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year, the one and only DG, David Glenn. The guy on the other side of the screen is a former basketball player at Seton Hall, so he knows what it's like to be in the old school Big East. He's also the former head coach of Santa Clara and former assistant at UCLA, Vanderbilt, Wake Forest, Pitt, Tennessee, won a 2001 NIT championship at Tulsa, also Appalachian State. We're talking about the coach, Kerry Keating. And I am Mike Waddell, a five-time national championship play-by-play guy back in the dark ages and former director of athletics at Towson University and the CAA, senior administrator in the Big Ten at Illinois and the SEC at Arkansas, and also a senior administrator at Cincinnati in the Big East and Akron in the Mid-American Conference. A reminder that we invite you to like and subscribe our content here on YouTube and also follow us on social media at X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Also visit our website at ncsportsnetwork.com for exclusive content from DG and our collection of experts who have covered and coached champions, played the game at the college level, and hired coaches like my man Pat Scarry at Towson, the 2025 CAA regular season champions, and now all-time winningest head coach in Tiger history. Bacon and basketball is coming up. Be sure to go to ESPN.com this week and register for the men's and women's brackets, as everyone who registers before the brackets are released will be eligible to win free bacon for a year. That's tasty North Carolina pork for 52 weeks. All you have to do is register in both the men's and the women's brackets on ESPN.com. Of course, the folks who enter the men's and women's bracket challenges are automatically entered into the contest of contests, the North Carolina Hoops Hog. It's all brought to you by the North Carolina Port Council. Okay, guys, let's get into a quick recap of this past weekend in ACC basketball. We'll expand it out if you want to talk about college basketball in general. DG, what were your hot impressions?
Yeah, Mike, as I look forward to participating in our annual Bacon and Basketball event, I thought over these last 7 days, the two biggest developments in our backyard, if you will, were first in the ACC. Most of the bubble news was bad. The biggest ACC games of the past week involved the league's bubble teams, and really only Carolina did what it wanted to do. The Heels won at Florida State. They've won 6 of their last 7. They're finally playing much better offensively, working through those backcourt chemistry issues that we've been discussing on this show all season long. And the Heels, as a result, do remain squarely in the NCAA tournament conversation as they head into that March 8th matchup against Duke in Chapel Hill. But the rest of the bubble news was bad. SMU lost at Stanford. Bubble team Pitt lost at Louisville. Bubble team Wake Forest got upset at home by a Virginia team with a losing record. So those 3 games are either missed opportunities or major steps backward or both. And now the ACC stares at a very realistic possibility of getting only 3 of its now 18 teams into the NCAA tournament, which would be the league's lowest participation rate since, way back in the 1970s. When they changed the rules that limited how many teams per conference could even be invited to the NCAA tournament. And part 2 of this past week, quick shout out to High Point University, and its second-year head coach, Alan Huss. That entire Panthers team, they won the Big South regular season for the second year in a row. They're the favorite this week at the Big South tournament in Johnson City, Tennessee, where UNC Asheville from our neighborhood is also another top contender. So congratulations. We celebrate champions here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Duke and High Point appear to be the only two regular season champs we'll have among the 19 programs in our state. But they're getting it done, and maybe we'll see more conference tournament champions here in the next couple of weeks as well.
Hey guys, as we inch closer to the ACC tournament coming up in Charlotte, I'm trying to find that team that might be able to become the fourth team to get in. Obviously, besides Duke and Clemson and Louisville, which have established themselves as at-large teams, it remains to be seen whether one of them wins the tournament or not. As the tournament is set up, it's the 6th seed that really is going to be at the advantage here to avoid the 1 seed Duke by being in the bottom of the bracket. Earlier in the season, I thought that team could be Stanford. Obviously, with Maxime Reynaud, that type of player can be so dynamic that they can make a run behind that player. They've kind of lingered. They're only 11-7 at Stanford right now, only 1 game behind the 4th place cluster of 12-6. But right behind them lingers Georgia Tech at 9-9. Who took care of business to stay in the conversation at 9-9 by winning at home against NC State. And guys, when you look at these last 2 games that are coming up in the conference slate, for Stanford, they're both on the road. Stanford needed a buzzer beater at Carolina, or else they would be 0-8 on the road in ACC play. It's not out of the question that they finish with 2 losses and go 11-9. If Georgia Tech can win their 2 games against Miami and then at Wake, which is obviously a difficult place, and Wake will have other motives to try to win that game, we could find ourselves in a tie for 6 that could bump Georgia Tech into the bottom of the bracket. The reason why I bring that up is they've already beaten Clemson. They've already beaten Louisville, the 2nd and 3rd place teams in the conference. If not for those 2 wins by Georgia Tech, we'd actually be talking about a 3-way tie at 19-1 between 3 teams who all basically beat each other. So yes, Duke took care of business, and on a national stage, they're that team that might cut down the nets. When you look at the next 2, Louisville and Clemson, they're 1 loss away from Georgia Tech each at being 19-1 themselves. Why is that important? Georgia Tech may be that team hiding in plain sight that may be able to make that middle of the pack run. We haven't dismissed them like the rest of the league. We haven't elevated them like some of their counterparts. So they're kind of lingering and have some results that may show up to be proficient come time when we get to Charlotte.
And my hot thing from over the weekend was from Division III basketball, where the Guilford College Quakers, who played for the Division III National Championship a year ago but came up just short, won their first ODAC title since 2019 and 5th overall, coming from the 5th seed to defeat Roanoke up in Salem, Virginia. Tom Palumbo and the Quakers now advance to the Division III National Tournament. NC Port, raising the bacon, raising the bar. All right, it's time now for our big things of the week. They're brought to you by Organize for Success. And David Glenn, I know last week you talked about the Big Four in terms of freshmen and their learning curves. This year, it's the 4 best players in the Atlantic Coast Conference and how they are emblematic of college basketball here in the NIL era.
Yeah, Mike, now that we're in the month of March, I was hoping to make my one big thing something that would apply to the fan bases of all 19 teams here in North Carolina at the Division I level, or all 18 schools in this expanded Atlantic Coast Conference. And I hope that these top 4 players do exactly that, because I think it's central, these concepts, to how you build a program, especially at the top level, but it could apply at anywhere in Division I men's basketball. All ACC ballots are due this week. And to me, the 4 guys that are the best in the ACC this week do symbolize and kind of personify the 4 ways to build a college basketball program in the modern era now that so many of the rules have changed. And here's what I mean. Top player, we all know, Cooper Flagg of Duke. You don't need me to tell you that he's the best player in this league. He's about to be the 4th freshman in ACC history to win the ACC Player of the Year honor, and he has a chance to join guys like Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, and Zion Williamson as the only freshman to ever win the National Player of the Year honor. Flagg represents the traditional way to build an elite ACC team. he was a prep All-American, right? He was not a sleeper. He was the National High School Player of the Year. And that's still going to matter. Even in this new world where the transfer portal is more important than ever, John Shire has 3 freshmen in his starting lineup. So even as the focus shifts to other areas, don't forget that there's going to be a handful of prep All-Americans, maybe no longer the entire McDonald's All-American team, which is 20 plus guys, but the subset of those prep All-Americans are still going to remain central to John Shire at Duke, Hubert Davis at Carolina, the Kentuckys and others of the world that have a track record of sometimes building that one and done culture, but also finding those high school gems that can help them for more than one season. The next best player, or these 4 are really just a category, but Chase Hunter of Clemson. This guy's the most efficient guard offensively in the entire Atlantic Coast Conference. He scores. He's near 50% from the field. He's near 90% from the line. He's over 40% from three-point land. He's smart. He's poised. He's confident. He can handle the ball. He can play on the wing. He can shoot threes. He can attack the basket. He takes high percentage shots. He gets to the free throw line. All of those things are in part because Chase Hunter of Clemson is a 6th-year college senior who has played for the same coach at the same school for all 6 years. Now, this, again, is the old school approach. But just like the Cooper Flaggs of the world will remain central to success in college basketball, I believe there's still going to be plenty of room for this other aspect of the old school approach. For those who don't know, Chase Hunter and his brother Dylan, who's also in Brad Brownell's rotation, they grew up in Atlanta. That's a 2-hour drive from Atlanta, Georgia to Clemson, South Carolina. Your family can come see you play. Your friends can come see your home games very easily. Again, this is the old school way of recruiting, but it still matters if you can sign quality prospects who fit your system. Maybe they want to stay close to home. Maybe they want to play in a top profile league like the Atlantic Coast Conference. And then for those who don't know about Chase Hunter, his first 3 years at Clemson, out of 6, remember, he was just a role player. He wasn't a star or anything close to that. He helped in small ways for his first 3 years. And thanks to, the COVID bonus year and he got an extra year, he's been a starter for the last 3 years, including on the Elite 8 team that Clemson had a year ago, and obviously on this top contending team this year. So prep All-American way, still in play. High school, good player, but somebody you can envision as a good fit. That's the second part of the old way of building a program. Now we get on to the third player, Chucky Hepburn of Louisville. This, of course, symbolizes the fastest growing talent pipeline. If you ignore it, you're dead in all of college basketball. He's a major college transfer. Chucky Hepburn is, I think, the number one reason offensively the Cardinals are in the top 3 of the ACC. I think he's the number one reason defensively that the Cardinals are in the top 3 of the ACC standings. He might be the ACC's Defensive Player of the Year, which is traditionally harder to do as a guard than if you're a big man. He leads the league in steals. He's also a very smart player, good scorer, good ball handler, good passer, good free throw shooter from the point guard position. But as that major college transfer, Chucky Hepburn was a good player at Wisconsin in the Big Ten. He was a 3-year starter, but he was not an elite player there. He was never first, second, or third team all Big Ten. But Pat Kelsey had a vision for Chucky Hepburn, as remember, Kelsey was starting that Louisville roster from scratch. Everybody who was on scholarship had left in the aftermath of Kenny Payne's dismissal. He found the perfect fit for what Pat Kelsey wanted to do in the form of Chucky Hepburn. Kelsey's best players this year, of course, are all major college transfers, and he went that way out of necessity because he started a roster from scratch. But even if you're not in a complete rebuild, you'd better land at least a couple of high-impact major college transfers every single year, or your program almost certainly is going to be left behind. The fourth and final guy, and all these are going to make first-team All-ACC. They're certainly on my ballot, and I don't know how you'd leave any of these 4 out. Flagg, Chase Hunter, Chucky Hepburn, and my fourth is the guy Coach Keating has mentioned frequently, Maxime Reynaud, the big guy from Stanford. The guy, he might lead this ACC in both scoring and rebounding. He's the only guy in the ACC right now averaging a double-double in points and rebounds. He's in the 20 points neighborhood, the 11 rebounds per game neighborhood. Stanford is going to win 20-plus games and probably play in the NIT, mainly because of Maxime Reynaud. Well, why do I think he also symbolizes and personifies another way you have to consider in modern college basketball? Maxime Reynaud did not play high school basketball in the United States. You could not have recruited him the traditional way, where you go to the Nike camp and the Adidas camp and holiday tournaments, and you see him with and against other American or North American players. Maxime Reynaud is not only from Paris, France, hence an international signee. He did what a lot of guys overseas do. People forget our country is the only country, major country, that merges college education and trying to get to professional basketball. The way they do it almost everywhere else in the world is you're almost like a tradesman. The way, a bridge painter would be an apprentice after high school and then get the bigger bucks of being a bridge painter. That's how they do it with their basketball prospects in Europe. So Maxime Reynaud was actually playing on the same professional organization roster as a Victor Wembanyama, now the superstar with the San Antonio Spurs of the NBA. So there he was, finished high school in Paris, France, but he went to play essentially as an apprentice for one of the top professional organizations in France. But Maxime Reynaud wanted to study at an elite university in America. Stanford certainly qualifies there. He wanted to play in one of the elite leagues, Pac-12, now ACC. But one of the reasons, remember this, the international pipeline is going to continue to grow in importance, is name, image, likeness money. For decades, if you were the 17-year-old high school graduate in Europe and you wanted to make some money, you weren't coming to the United States. All those rules are out the window. So think of all these prospects who for decades have done this apprentice thing, whether it's Germany or Austria or, any of those leagues overseas, France and Italy, etc. Instead of automatically saying, well, I'm just going to be an apprentice for one of these pro organizations and gradually work my way up to the parent club that plays in France's top league or Spain's top league or whatever, I'm going to consider an American education because now they can pay me in a way that they couldn't pay those overseas prospects for basically the entirety of NCAA history until these last 4 years, roughly last 4 years. So I don't know who else is going to make first team All-ACC. Could be an RJ Davis, could be a Hunter Salas, could be somebody else. But those first four guys are not only wonderful basketball players, they represent the four different categories of the way you must try to build a modern-day college basketball team. And I think whether you're a fan of those four players or those four schools or not, those principles and the very different backgrounds of their recruiting stories, they apply to your school, whatever that favorite might be.
David, that's a very interesting point about veterans being a big part of who are going to be winning the big awards in the ACC this season. Kerry Keating, you're a math guy and analytics whiz, and you've been going inside the numbers with Clemson, and you feel like Brad Brownell's Tigers could be headed back to a deep run in March Madness.
Well, we talked earlier about maybe Georgia Tech being that ACC team kind of hiding in plain sight that could make a run in Charlotte. I think from a national perspective, this time of year brings a lot of the metrics together to try to predict what's going to happen in March, albeit a lot of those predictions are for gambling purposes. I think for our purposes of trying to figure out which ACC teams besides Duke could find themselves in the second weekend. And certainly after last year when you had Clemson make that Elite Eight run, and Coach Glenn talked about, Chase Hunter being at the forefront of that, bringing that experience back with Ian Shefflin and two great transfers, obviously coming in Lachlan and Zachary. You've got guys that present metrics that line up with historically teams that are positioned and ended up winning the NCAA tournament. And what does that mean? Teams that are in the top 21 of offensive efficiency and the top 31 at the same time of defensive efficiency at this time in the season, not maybe in a little bit less than a month when the selection show comes out. Those metrics may pare down some more, but there's only 10 teams right now that present themselves in those two categories, and Clemson is one of them. Now, you would think that out of the 14 teams from the SEC that may make the tournament, you're going to have at least half of them being those metrics. Well, really right now, it's just Auburn and Florida that present themselves with those specific metrics. There's actually 4 Big 12 teams out of that group. And then you have Duke and now Clemson, Wisconsin being the other one that's kind of snuck in there after this weekend from a defensive and offensive perspective. I think when you look at Clemson, if they can replicate and kind of keep themselves, and right now, guys, they're at number 17 in offense, number 24 in defense. I think the experience from last year of not being a stranger to what it takes to get to the second and maybe even the second weekend, but then the second day of the second weekend, having that come back in Shefflin and Hunter, adding in some experience, obviously, in Lachlan and Zachary, and then a coach who, quite honestly, has been a little bit maligned over the years for lack of consistency, but now in the most important time of what Coach Glenn eloquently pointed out of how to build rosters, has put himself back in a position to be able to make a run. Look, we talked about Georgia Tech slip up. If they don't lose that game, they'll probably finish 19-1. And if you take care of business in the league, however good or bad it may be, you're going to be in that position to get probably what should be a top 4 seed historically, but because of the league's lack of strength, they'll probably be a 5 seed. But 4 or 5 in the end really kind of, is a toss-up. And I think this year you're going to find yourself talking about Clemson maybe a little bit more. There'll be more national people surprised by, oh, Clemson's playing? Oh, I thought it was just Duke. Guys like us, and obviously yourselves, have been watching this league forever and certainly paying attention to it this year, may realize not just that Duke game that proved what Clemson can do at home, but maybe Clemson is that team that deserves a little bit more love, regardless of the rest of the teams in the league outside of Louisville not taking care of business. We're going to talk about this tournament being the SEC Invitational. There could be 14 of the 68 teams come from one conference. This is basically a second SEC tournament. But at the end of the day, only 16 teams can make the second weekend, and only 8 of those teams are going to make the second day of the second weekend. If the ACC finds themselves with 25% of those 8, and even if they're on opposite sides of the bracket, which they should, I'm not saying Clemson is a Final Four team. But when you historically look at the last 23, I think, NCAA champions, they've come from this pool of 10. And when you start to look at the net ranking right now, it's getting a little bit more refined, which we'll get to later. It may actually help Carolina get in. That net ranking is becoming more and more fed with historical data. It may be a little bit more accurate than you realize. And when you look at the top of that ranking right now are the obvious players that everyone nationally has been talking about. Clemson's kind of lingering right there. If these 2 metrics hold up, then we're talking about Clemson being in this top 21/31 or better grouping. They may find themselves not just at a group of 8 or 10, but maybe a group of 6 or 8 that a lot more pundits, and you'll hear it. I guarantee you'll hear at least one guy in the post-bracket breakdown act like he's got Clemson figured out. Because he'll just look at these metrics and then spew some stuff. He's probably never watched Clemson. Yes, I'm talking to a couple of guys not on this show right now. They know who they are. Oh, I'm picking Clemson like it was some, like gaudy, like I did all the research. Clemson is that team that can find themselves repeating themselves. For us, we'd love to see it as ACC folks. I think they're a team that if they can keep taking care of business, have a strong ACC tournament. Look, I love to see the Clemson-Duke rematch, obviously in the ACC final, just to see where Clemson's at and maybe really prepare them even more so for that second or third weekend come March. I think Clemson's the type of team that's kind of earned that respectability right now.
And Mike, let me add a quick postscript to Coach Keating's points about the Clemson Tigers, because you guys know I've been on this Brad Brownell Clemson Tigers bandwagon for a few years now. The coach mentioned more the NCAA tournament concept and angles, which I respect and agree on. The ACC tournament, remember, Clemson has never won in more than 70 years as one of the original members of this league. So when you're trying to do anything for the first time in any school's history, there's something special about that. Also, in 70-plus years, Clemson's only made it to the ACC title game twice. In 70-plus years. Once was before even I was born, and once was the year Tyler Hansbrough and the Tar Heels beat Clemson in the ACC title game. Even getting to the Final Two would be an historic element. And I think Coach Keating's assessment of Coach Brad Brownell's now 15 years, he's like the elder statesman now, right? In the ACC, now that so many other guys have resigned or retired or are about to retire. It is both fair to say that Brad Brownell's 15 years have been a mixed bag. That's fair. He only made the big dance twice in his first 10 years, right? That's just factual. throw out opinions. That's not a great track record. It's at Clemson. It's not bad, but it's not great. This is the third time in the last 5 years he's taken him to the big dance. And I really believe this, guys. If we did a deep dive research on, let's just say, the half a dozen greatest basketball teams in Clemson history, I believe that Brad Brownell is now responsible for 3 of the 6. So you can take shots at the guy's 15 years. You can point out the lowlights, but last year's Elite Eight certainly qualifies. The school's never been farther than that. This year's team, I think, has a chance to qualify. Who knows? Maybe tie for a regular season title, maybe win the ACC tournament, maybe make another Elite Eight or beyond run. And then one of his earlier teams was really, really good that ended up in the Sweet 16. So let's be fair to Brad Brownell in a way that many Clemson fans have not been for much of the last 15 years. Again, point out his setbacks and imperfections, all fair, but let's not ignore that he has made Clemson basketball relevant more often in 15 years, or as often in 15 years, than I believe the Tigers were probably for the 50 years prior to Brad Brownell being hired there.
This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com.
The ACC tournament is coming to Charlotte this year. 15 of the 18 league members will be in attendance playing at the Spectrum Center. We hope that you will be coming to Charlotte as well. If you are, you need to take NC by train. Get on that Amtrak and roll it in on the rails here to the Queen City. It's a great way to come to Charlotte for any type of major sporting event. The ACC tournament, Carolina Panthers football, Charlotte FC soccer, the upcoming PGA Championship in May, and also NASCAR events in both May and October. One of our newest partners here on the North Carolina Sports Network, NC by Train. You can check out their information at their website, ncbytrain.org. And attendance at the early games of the ACC tournament has always been a struggle. Last year in D.C., the year before that in Greensboro, it's never good. And I have to ask you guys, why not make the ACC tournament, if you're going to leave 3 teams out, why not leave 3 more teams at home and make it a common sense, easy to manage, and easy to digest 12-team event? It would push more emphasis on the regular season by leaving that bottom third at home. And if you're trying to make up the content to our friends at ESPN, play 2 more regular season games, 1 home and 1 away. Everybody makes more money, and it's a better event at the end of the season. Again, putting more emphasis on the regular season. Kerry, David, what do you think? DG, we'll start with you.
Well, Mike, I want to remind our viewers and listeners first that you and I will be on press row in Charlotte, bringing daily video and audio content from right there courtside, the way we did last year with great reviews from up in D.C. when you and I were at different locations. Also, real quick, NC by Train, thanks to them for being a new partner. I can see my friend Mike Waddell in the Charlotte area from the Triangle area where Coach Keating and I are often based. For $29 in each direction. Like that number was great. I dodged parking problems. I dodged traffic headaches. $29 each way. I don't know that's always the price, but I just wanted to share that we've walked down that path, and it's a worthy one to consider. The answer to your question, Mike, I think part of the fun of this 3-man panel is that I've given Coach Keating's deep background both as an athlete but also a head coach, given your deep background as an athletic director in other contexts. I believe the answer to your question about the size of the ACC tournament requires multiple perspectives. And Coach can elaborate on his coach's perspective, but I can promise you the coaches that I know don't want the stigma of not being invited to the ACC tournament, right?
That's right.
The tournament's 70 plus
Woodmore.
years old, and the only example of somebody not being invited to the ACC tournament prior to this year, where for those who forget, the new rules just chop the bottom three teams in the standings out. Prior to this year, everybody was always invited, unless you're on probation or there was some really odd set of circumstances. So this is new, and if you do what Mike Waddell just suggested and you make it an even smaller tournament, I do think you'd avoid that low attendance headache on the Tuesday. I do think you'd make for more compelling television. Few people would miss the games that you chopped, and I've been at a lot of those early week tournament events, man, and it's crickets sometimes in those arenas. But some coaches wouldn't like it for the stigma aspect. Some athletic directors might not like it because for decades, one of the carrots, if you will, for being a major contributor was that you were near the front of the line to buy ACC tournament tickets. Now, that could still be the case, and maybe your argument would be big boosters really only care about those final 3 days. Even if they're buying the full week's worth of tickets, they're probably only going to 1 or 2 or 3 days. So maybe there's pushback on all of these. But we all know the philosophy usually loses out to the money. So what's philosophically one of the reasons we always invite all teams to conference tournaments for decades? Because philosophically, we love one aspect of college basketball being that all 364 teams, no matter under the old way, no matter how bad your regular season was, there was something just philosophically beautiful about the idea that once we get to March, even if you were dead last in your league, even if theoretically you didn't win a game all year, theoretically, all 364 under the old way had a path to the NCAA tournament because everybody gives their bid to the official tournament champion. So you could be 0-30 or whatever and theoretically make that run. So there's that Cinderella aspect that has been central to college basketball for my lifetime and longer. And that philosophy is extinguished once you start having smaller conference tournaments. But again, philosophy, beautiful ideas in modern college athletics keep losing out to money and the bottom line. And if the TV partners want more of other types of games that Mike just mentioned, regular season or otherwise, and they want fewer of just these dog day afternoon type matchups, well, the philosophical observations are going to lose again to the money observations. But we know that those coaches conversations will happen. Those AD conversations will happen. Those booster conversations will happen. Those TV partner conversations will happen. And money will be a part of all of those conversations in a way that will lead us to whatever is next when it comes to not only the ACC tournament, but all these other conference tournaments across the land.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I spent some time, fortunately, in some power conferences at some great conference tournament environments. The pageantry involved, the postseason feel from the coaching perspective. Certainly grew up in the Big East, in the Garden, and everything that comes with that. I had a chance to come to the ACC, was in the SEC twice, was in the Pac-10. And the reason why I use the Pac-10 last is we've only had a Pac-10 tournament for the last 2 decades plus. They didn't have a tournament. They were letting their regular season champion determine who got the auto bid. We may, unfortunately, from the fan perspective, see a shift, as David mentioned, to that going back to some different way of determining your champion. Now, what it takes out is what's been evolving and has evolved into that Cinderella. Even in the conference tournaments, like let's take out the first weekend, which maybe the greatest weekend in all of sports, right? Just for the aspect of the upset or the buzzer beater or the unexpected. But when you look back, and I'm just taking a look as David was talking about the last 20 years of the Pac-10 tournament, outside of Oregon State in 2020, there's been no real upset winner. They've still delivered their better teams. Oregon and Arizona have been the only champions in the last 10 years outside of the COVID year and outside of Oregon State in 2021. But even before that, you had a Colorado team that was one of a nationally ranked team in 2011. And when the Washington teams that Lorenzo Romar had, one of them was a 1 seed in the tournament. Not traditional names, But point being is not the 7 through 10 team. And even when they expanded out, winning. I don't really know what that answer is right now, although it may be dictated for ourselves. And the only reason that teams are really having, outside of David's mention of the money involved and the gathering of the region, if you will, in an area to kind of celebrate the conference and let the teams get ready for postseason, is money. And this may be falling by the wayside towards networks determining what the value of another game may be as opposed to a grouping of games. We're talking about 3 games on the first day of the ACC tournament this year that, quite frankly, I'm not sure if we were privy to know what the analytically metrics are for the finance involved. Are they actually making money on those 3 games to have the building open, to staff it, to travel the teams, to put them in the hotel again? Like, all of the things that come with running an extra day on what's already a long tournament. I'm not sure that value, as Michael mentioned pre-show, may not be better suited for 12 teams. Well, maybe it's better suited for, like, I remember going to the Big East tournament. I cut school every day before I got to college for a Big East quarterfinal day. And when you had 2 games in the morning and a break to go eat lunch and come back for 2 games at night, I'm telling you, I remember those ACC guys saying, oh, the ACC. I'm like, guys, don't even tell me about it. You have no idea what it's like on a Thursday or Friday in New York in the midst of winter transitioning to spring with these 8 teams just absolutely hammering each other to get to semifinal day. I thought it was a great day. I thought it was one of the better days in basketball as a kid growing up. I don't know if you move to even 8 and just have a 3-day tournament, right? Just take the top 8. Now this bodes the question, and we talked also about some of the older guards saying, well, let's combine some of these leagues. You know, you heard Coach K and Coach Pitino talk about that. Well, I think that's trying to get ahead of what's going to happen anyway, which is the networks and the real financial driver of the eyeballs and the streaming, not just the people in the stands, but the millions of people that can watch. We may have this dictated by the network saying this is how we want to determine this. And maybe it's just a different way of getting the end of the season together, and you're already going to award and put more emphasis again back to where it was 25 years ago on the regular season. When you have this many teams involved, it's really, really hard to have a more than 3-round tournament of significance. It's really, really hard, although NC State kind of bucked that trend last year in becoming a 10 seed to win. You know, you've had the teams that'll win 4 or 5 games. I think there was a team that won 5 games and actually made a run in the NCAA tournament before NC State. It's hard. It's hard on the coaches. It's hard on the kids. It's hard on the fans too, right? Like you think about the NC State fans last year that went to the first round, think, okay, we'll watch a game, watch it too. And then they realize after the tournament's over, their pocketbook got hit ×3. It's like, oh, now we got to go back and recoup that, right? So there's a lot of extenuating factors that are involved in this. I don't know what the best way really is, but as long as we still have 68 teams, as long as through all this change, the end result is still March Madness in 3 weekends, whether we go to 68 and change how those last 8 are adjudicated or not, when we have this traditional 64-team tournament, it's really, really hard as long as that contract is held to change how we get to this point, given the fact this is what we've set up and we have this Cinderella-type run for 2 weeks in March leading into March and then the first week of March Madness. As a coach, I think it kind of goes school to school. And David talked about this, and we opened up in how rosters are built right now. You know, and I'll tell you right now, there are some teams and some guys, and we've seen some ADs, Mike, take this track too, fire coaches 2 weeks before the season's ended because now they're being dictated by the transfer portal opening up in the second weekend of March. And you're going to have some ADs that think like, well, wait, we're getting penalized for making the NCAA tournament because we can't adjudicate the portal. My answer to that right now is this is a professionalization on all aspects. The guys that need to be taking care of the portal for you are not with the team. They're not coaching the team. This is probably what's going to push the higher level teams to have specific staffs or a person or people in place only evaluating the portal so that they can take care of that, and it's more proactive than reactive. There are so many different moving parts to this. This is going to be a decade-long run to get this thing figured out as college basketball, as we know, it changes.
King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach is the longest-running restaurant in New Hanover County. That's since 1947. and it recently was renovated to an impeccable degree by our good friends Jimmy Galeese and his amazing wife, Keaton. Their outstanding chefs offer fresh local seafood, salad options, and creative, tasty variations of pork, beef, and poultry dishes. King Neptune has always been a great choice for dinner and/or drinks, and now it's open for lunch and brunch too. Check out the lunch, brunch, and dinner menus at neptuneswb.com. That's Neptunes with an S, then WB for Wrightsville Beach. Again, the King Neptune restaurant website is neptuneswb.com.
Our weekly look inside the University of North Carolina basketball program is brought to us by our friends at the Original Salt Works down in Wilmington. Bob Hubbard, he makes the best breakfast lunch combo anywhere in the coastal region of North Carolina, maybe for all of the bold North State. If you're down in Wilmington, check them out. It's the Original Salt Works. Let's talk some Tar Heels right now. And Carolina has been beating up on the little brothers over the last week, and they're getting a little excited, the Carolina fans. Hey, we're on the road back. We're scoring a lot of points. We're playing great defense. But guys, is it too little, too late following that very poor quad one performance for North Carolina and head coach Hubert Davis? Kerry Keating?
Yeah, let me take an overall look at this because there's a lot to dissect about Carolina. We've been talking about the last few weeks here. I think Carolina is going to make itself the poster child for how important the net ranking is. Because when you just take that net ranking, which takes a lot of different factors in, and we really don't know unless Bubba Cunningham makes us aware of how they get to these decisions. And obviously, it just so happens that Bubba Cunningham is the chairman of the committee this year. What a coincidence. Carolina is squarely in the tournament if you just went by net ranking, right? And the reason why they are is because of the schedule that they played prior to the ACC. In normal years, and David, you can attest to this way better than I can, their quad one would not just be stuffed with 11 games. It would be close to the 15 or even 20 if we had more quad one teams in the ACC. The reason for that is a whole nother topic of discussion. I think Carolina becomes that team that the committee says, hey, they went out and played enough teams. Now, the pundits will say, but they were only 1-10 in quad one. You can't punish a team for your league not being up to snuff if you went out in your non-conference. And this, to me, is the Gonzaga model. We went through this in the WCC forever. Gonzaga kind of jumped the shark and was so much better than everybody. They had to go out and what we called schedule their non-conference within their conference and then vice versa. In a way, de facto, that's what Carolina has done. This would be probably not a discussion, even if they were 3-8 in quad one right now. I mean, quad one wins are clearly the topic of discussion. They've made quad one this important. They've put themselves in that discussion by playing the game. Did they win them? No. 1-10. Obviously, that Duke game looms very, very large at the end of the season for other reasons, just for the fact it's always a big game at the end of the year, no matter where it is. I'm really curious to see if Carolina can hold on to that, keep taking care of business, obviously leading into that Duke game, and keep winning the games, which they've done. They've had a shift since Hubert lifted that weight off his shoulder and kind of made the announcement, we're going to hire a GM. The contract extension that came out apparently was agreed to even before the season. How they announced that. There's things that Hubert obviously knew and didn't know about his team, but really what he needed to know was how he was going to be able to set himself up for the future. Once he kind of lifted that weight, the team has responded in a way that they're playing better. Not a coincidence, in my opinion. Can that carry into the postseason? What helps Carolina in this case, and we just had a long discussion about whether they should even have this anymore, is they'll get some more games and chances to keep winning in the ACC tournament. Their matchups may be more important to them than anyone else in the tournament because they're going to need a few more of those. So it'll be interesting to see when the bracket shapes up, who they get matched up against. But going into this last week, got to win. You just have to win. Just got to keep taking care of business. And then again, that Duke game, and what a better way to finish the season, not just against Duke, but when you're Carolina, and as David talked about, when you have that type of desperation and ulterior motive to play, Clemson being that example of maybe playing for the third time in 70 years in the ACC final. Now you've got an ulterior motive if you're at the micro for Duke and for Carolina. For Carolina, not just the big Duke because that's what Hubert seemingly has success doing, in ending Coach K's career that way. But now it's a chance to really not take all of the questions out by beating one of the top two teams, obviously in the country, and Duke.
Yeah, Mike, let me underline one thing that Coach Keating said because it is right on point. As crazy as it might sound, if Carolina's 1-10 record against Quad 1 were tweaked just a little and it was 3-8, there is zero doubt that the Tar Heels would be invited to this NCAA tournament. That's how important those crown jewel victories are. And if you're skeptical about the truth of that statement, let me give you an example. The Clemson Tigers are currently projected as a 5 seed, which is pretty darn good. They are obviously one of the 3 best teams in the ACC. Clemson has that great win over Duke at Littlejohn Coliseum. Clemson has that great win over the Kentucky Wildcats. You know what the Tigers' 3rd best win this season is? As we speak, you could call it SMU. They went to Dallas and beat the Mustangs, but SMU might not be an NCAA tournament team. You could say they beat Wake Forest. That's another nice win. Wake might not be an NCAA tournament team. You might think it's the Pitt win at Pitt. Pitt doesn't look like an NCAA tournament team. You could say the Clemson Tigers' 3rd best win is over the Tar Heels. Well, maybe, but the Tar Heels might not be an NCAA tournament team. So Clemson has two crown jewels, Duke and Kentucky, and those 2 crown jewels, without a whole lot of substance behind that, have Clemson as a 5 seed. So it is not at all an exaggeration to say what Coach Keating said about the difference between 1-10 in Quad 1, even 2-9, or of course 3-8 in Quad 1 would have you in. And part of this answer, by the way, even though Mike Waddell's original question was about the Tar Heels specifically, you can apply a lot of these principles that we're applying to the Tar Heels bubble status to Wake Forest. You can apply it to SMU. And until their slide recently, you could have applied it to the Pitt Panthers, the 4 bubble teams we've had in the ACC for a matter of weeks now. Here's the challenge, and Coach Keating hit on this as well. But let me give you an example from outside the league. Oklahoma is a bubble team. Oklahoma now of the SEC. And the Sooners' overall record is not very good at all. It's 17-12, which sounds like the definition of mediocrity, right? But the Oklahoma Sooners have head-to-head non-conference wins over, get this, Arizona, Michigan, and Louisville. I mean, the Sooners are only 4-12 in the SEC. That's a horrific conference record. But those same Sooners may make the big dance because of those 3 absolutely enormous crown jewel wins outside the league over Arizona, Michigan, and Louisville, all of which, of course, will be in the tournament, because that trifecta for Oklahoma, put aside the mediocre overall record, put aside the lousy conference record, that trifecta of victories is far better than any of the ACC's bubble teams can offer right now. Right now, UNC has 1 win over a school we're sure would get an at-large invitation. 1, it's the UCLA victory. Wake Forest has 1 win over a school we know would get an at-large bid. That's the Michigan game. And believe it or not, SMU, right on the bubble, has 0 wins over any teams that we know would get an at-large bid. These schools' their other best wins are over fellow bubble teams or probable NIT teams. And that historically is almost never enough to get into the big dance. The bottom line is right back to Coach Keating's point. If your best wins remain what they are right now, if Wake doesn't go to Duke and beat the Devils, if Carolina doesn't host Duke and beat the Devils this coming Saturday, if none of these teams we're talking about from the ACC bubble goes to Charlotte at the ACC tournament and beats some combination of Louisville or Clemson or Duke, just adding those crown jewel victories, I'm telling you right now, it applies to all 4 of those bubble schools. If you don't add any crown jewel victories, you will be left out. Not might. You will be left out on Selection Sunday. So what are your paths? Well, you can win the ACC tournament. That's always a path. The crown jewel event of the league, automatic bid goes to the conference tournament champion. That's in play for everybody who's invited to Charlotte next week. You can beat Duke if you're Wake or Carolina. That would be an enormous step in the right direction. And then your third option is, again, going to Charlotte and beating some if you keep winning, you'll eventually run into some combination of Clemson, Louisville, Duke. And you just have to add one or more of those wins or you're going to be left out. And that's why the ACC as a 3-bid league is still a possibility. I'm guessing that one or more of these bubble teams, for our perspective here in North Carolina, we hope the Deacs and the Heels both get in. Just makes it more fun for everybody in our audience and for us as well. But all of those ACC bubble teams for now must upgrade their resumes or they're going to get left out.
David, hop back to something that Coach Keating talked about, and that's Hubert Davis's contract extension that was agreed to last summer, but not signed until recently. What is the reason for that delay? Is that subterfuge, or is that just modern day negotiations and legalese, tapping into your attorney hat in the day's world of college basketball?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned legalese because I'm telling you, for those who don't know, public universities have to do things a certain way, right? Private universities, if you're Wake or Duke, there's certain things you have to disclose publicly, but a whole lot of things you never have to share with the media, with the general public, with your own fan base. It's discretionary what you choose to share at it for the most part at those private universities. Carolina has been caught repeatedly not sharing things publicly that they're supposed to share publicly. So as an attorney here in North Carolina, I'd rather they do it the way the law tells them to do it in this context and other contexts. But whatever, they had a verbal agreement last summer. They didn't sign the deal until December. Sometimes that does happen because as a guy who practiced contract law specifically, I can tell you that there's a process between people making a verbal agreement and leaving the room after shaking hands and then writing everything they thought they agreed to into a mega page document. There's a whole lot of phone calls after the verbal agreement where you say, hey, the buyout is this, right? And you agreed to, if he walks away, he has to pay the school what? And what percentage of his total compensation is a part of a buyout? Like, sometimes people shake hands and they don't dot all the I's and cross the T's. I can promise you that. In fact, when you have clients who do, they're dream clients. They are the exception. So anyway, it's a fair argument to say it takes a while between the verbal and the signed, approved by the Board of Trustees, publicly available document. So maybe you want to give the Tar Heels some benefit of the doubt there. I do think in the broader perspective, and for folks have asked, why did even Hubert get a contract extension? Well, remember, the timing of the agreement was fresh off an ACC regular season title. It was not fresh off this up and down, topsy-turvy fourth season for Hubert as the head coach of the Tar Heels. So timing matters. Also, remember, we're in this quickly evolving world that we often get Mike Waddell's AD perspective on, Coach Kerry Keating's coach's perspective on. So many rules have changed that Carolina ultimately decided when push comes to shove, listen, bad coaches don't go all the way to the national title game in year one. They don't go into Cameron Indoor Stadium and beat Mike Krzyzewski in his last home game after 42 years and then send him into retirement at the Final Four a month later. Bad coaches don't do that, period. Bad coaches also don't win ACC regular season titles. You know the names of the guys who have won ACC regular season titles in the last 15 years? Tony Bennett 6 times, Roy Williams 5 times, Mike Krzyzewski a couple times, Leonard Hamilton had one, Jim Larinaga of Miami had a couple, Gary Williams of Maryland at the end of their tenure. I mean, most of those guys are either already in the Hall of Fame or on their way to the Hall of Fame. Hubert put his name on that list, and that deserves some street cred. That whether fans are fickle, right? And they're usually overreacting to the last thing that happened. University presidents and athletic directors, if they're good, look at a body of work. They're not overreacting with emotion and anger at the last thing that happened. That's what bad ADs do. Good ADs look at the body of work. Good ADs tell the fans to just calm down and stay in their lane. And good ADs look at the body of work. And the reality is, just as the critics are right that Hubert's second season was a train wreck, that's a fair assessment of his second season. His supporters are right that year one was phenomenal in many ways, and year three was a regular season ACC title and a Sweet 16. So is it good enough to go to the NCAA tournament twice in 4 years at a school like Carolina? No, it's not. And the critics have another fair point if Hubert misses the big dance this year. Prior to Hubert's hiring, Carolina had made 43 of the previous 46 NCAA tournaments. That's about 94%. At some schools, going half the time is insanely impressive. If you're in a one-bid league and you go to the NCAA tournament half the time, you might get a statue built of you outside the arena. Half the time at Carolina, of course, is unacceptable. But the last layer that I'll remind folks of, Carolina ultimately concluded, whether some fans disagree or not, that's a fair debate. They ultimately concluded that a mixture of Hubert's first and third year success and giving him more tools and that flushed out infrastructure that you and Coach Keating have elaborated on throughout our shows this season. John Shire had a general manager within weeks of being hired as Mike Krzyzewski's successor. Carolina's 3 years behind flushing out that basketball support staff. Duke has an analytics specialist and a player branding specialist and a name, image, likeness specialist and a portal specialist. Carolina's in the process of flushing all that out. If you believe that Hubert's a good enough coach, and you believe that with more administrative and institutional support, you'll get an even better version of Hubert Davis, that justifies why he's now extended all the way through 2030, even if, the exact timing and the details were really goofy this particular time.
Kerry, how long did it take you to sign your contract at Santa Clara?
It didn't take that long, but it wasn't that short either. And as Mike said, we actually started work without a signed contract. I mean, it happens often because of the timing of things, and it's so different, now than it was then. But the common thing is speed is always and timing is always of the essence when it comes to recruiting. You want to kind of represent properly. It took a couple months after the agreement to actually get it signed, and a little bit of haggling back and forth, but a little bit of a lower level than what we're dealing with at Carolina and the ACC, SEC schools of the world.
I tell you, David, maybe what we ought to be doing is following the lead of David McKenzie, another Triangle attorney who sued the University of North Carolina system and won $25,000 for them not following their rules. Maybe we should just sue Carolina again and again and again, and then they could be one of our partners here on the North Carolina Sports Network. I think that would be kind of funny.
That would. There's a weird thread right now in people who basically don't care what the law is and just do whatever they feel like it and wait for people to sue them. It's a very weird thread in our country as we speak, and it's a very weird thread at Carolina and in some other places in the ACC. The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up.
NC Pork, raising the bacon, raising the bar. It's time now to turn our attention to the Wolfpack of North Carolina State, the defending ACC champions. And this segment is brought to you by the Lawson Insurance Group. Gentlemen, NC State, the Pack is at a crossroads once again. They will not be in Charlotte after an 0-2 week when we said on this program a week ago that they needed to be perfect. They need to be winning games at this time of year. Where does Kevin Keats, where does Boo Corrigan go from here? Kerry, we'll start out with you.
Well, piggybacking off our prior topic here, I think this is a clear question of where they're at in their contract. And obviously we know why they're even in this position to begin with, because all of the chatter and the noise and the smoke was that last year was going to be Kevin's year. Speculation runs rampant in this day and age, right? With everyone being a media expert, even the traditional media like ourselves being able to really have an idea of what's happening and having questions asked directly to the sources and not just speculating. But be that as it may, Kevin put himself in a position after last year's run to earn the right to build on that. The question really remains, actually two questions remain, and I think David can really attest to this, having seen games in the state even before Kevin got here, before specifically to Coach Keith. Where does this contract put Boo Corrigan in assessing where the immediate future of NC State is? Because the one thing that you can do is you can revamp your entire roster right now. You don't have to wait anymore. You know, it used to be taboo for coaches to say to a kid, you might be better off someplace else. You couldn't force kids to leave by way of the old guard. Now you have coaches basically saying, like, we're just going to go get all new guys next year, which for a guy on the roster is like, well, wait a minute. Am I on a one-year deal now? Like, it's amazing the rhetoric that's out there coming from the coaches, and in some cases from the kids in their social channels, because that's their only voice, because they're not holding press conferences. They don't have podcasts where they can say whatever they want and edit it out like the pro guys can and do right now, although that's probably coming down the pike too when you think about it, is what can Boo do if he needs to either restructure this? Were there metrics put in place that take some things away? Does not making the ACC tournament actually eliminate one of those years that extended him? No one really knows, although I think a lot of these things, correct me if I'm wrong, being a state school or public record, we may be able to find these things out. Be that as it may, just from a rudimentary standpoint, the way that Kevin has decided to play at NC State is clearly parallel to the success that he had at UNC Wilmington. And there's something to be said for that. That's how he coaches. That's how he sets his program up. That's a success that he has. The only difference being is he can get a different caliber player. Although the difference in how you're constructing that roster right now has changed. And it may be hurting Kevin Keats, because that seems to me that you want to develop those guys into being upperclassmen and really understanding how to play as ball-dominant guards. That's the way that Kevin has been playing since he got here. What you turn around and see the most success he's had is with a dynamic big guy. Now, how he got there is with the guards, and obviously McConnell making the shot to get him in a position to make the run in the ACC tournament. But the success to the Final Four is largely on the shoulders of DJ Burns. However that happened is irrelevant. I think Kevin needs to step back and really assess, can I keep making a forward march in the current constraints with this dynamic guard, shoot at all costs, do what you need to do way with a couple of nice big men sprinkled in? Or do we need to make wholesale changes in how we construct a roster because we can, just for life support? Or does Boo take the 10,000-foot view and say, listen, here's the decision. You need to do this, and we'll invest in this to be able for you to do that. Or the investment, unfortunately, is going to come in buying him out. So it's the relationship between Boo and Kevin that really needs to be explained, understood, and we're not really privy to that outside of those two gentlemen. But for the Wolfpack Nation, I think the question you need to ask is, one, Kevin, are you going to now change and make an adjustment? Because you can. You don't have to develop a big man to go with these guards. You can go identify in the portal that group of kids, sell them on the opportunity to come in, and maybe a change even more so now than before. Or is it just, we're going to ride it till it's over, and then the guy that's going to decide that is going to be someone else, and that someone else is the AD. And obviously, from a business perspective, this decision that Boo has to make. It's an interesting dynamic right now, given the results that have happened this year with NC State on the heels of just a year ago making that run, and the ability that you have to change things more now than ever before. I think these 2 weeks without having to go to Charlotte to really get yourself ready will show, one, were they ready for this? Have they been doing things, seeing the results, knowing they were going to be in this position to get into that portal prepared? Or are they going to be reactive and try to go find what they think is the best guy? And we know that sometimes doesn't always fit. There's a lot of things that go into doing this right now to get the right guys, even a short amount of time. It's a daunting time right now for Coach Keats and Boo. Nevertheless, doesn't make the Wolfpack faithful any more happy that they're not going to be in Charlotte, and certainly not in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, one thing to remember here is that it is really, really unusual for a coach to get fired a year after a truly special season. And a lot of Wolfpack fans forget, if they're hammering Kevin Keats, he went to 2 straight NCAA tournaments. When you go to 2 straight NCAA tournaments and one of them results in a run to the Final Four, almost always, if you have a bad year the next year, you get the benefit of the doubt. Now, 2 straight bad years can change things, especially in this microwave society and this rebuild your team every year version of college basketball. Remember, when Jim Larinaga had the best 2-year run in the history of Miami Hurricanes basketball, one was the Final Four, one was the Elite Eight, and then had a horrifically bad next year. He didn't get fired. But why did he get the benefit of the doubt? Because in the context of taking a school to a place that it had truly never been, and he did it twice in a row, you're going to get the benefit of the doubt. Now, this year, of course, is a second straight really bad year for Miami, and he chose to retire. He was also in his mid-70s. So 2 bad years after greatness is a lot different than 1 bad year after greatness. And that's why I don't think Boo Corrigan is ready to pull the trigger on what would I think right now be the neighborhood of an $8 million buyout. A lot of folks, that contract is public. For just the long story short, legally, is that if a coach's compensation is $3 million plus, but his base compensation is $1.5 million, usually the full $3 million plus is not guaranteed. It's usually that base stuff times the number of years remaining. Well, Kevin Keats exercised that option. Remember, it was built into his contract. Hey, you do these things. You as the coach get to decide whether you want that 2-year extension. He took it all the way through 2030, which means after our current season, he has 5 years left. So if his base compensation is almost roughly $1.5 million, let's call it, times 5, that's $7.5 million. And there may be some other smaller guarantees. So let's call it $8 million or so. That's not like Dave Doran's $15 million buyout as the football coach, but it's still $8 million, right? I mean, that's not found under the, in the couch cushions and under the carpet. You guys keep, of course, as you would, the longtime AD and the longtime head coach. Of course, the nature of this relationship matters between Boo Corrigan and Kevin Keats. What does Boo think of Kevin as a coach? Does he think last year was truly a lightning in a bottle situation? Does Boo, who's been around the block, does he believe that there's a fair question about whether the approach to basketball with that guard-dominated concept that Coach Keating described, it absolutely worked at UNC Wilmington. I mean, that 3-year run was maybe the greatest 3-year run in the history of UNC Wilmington basketball. But in the CAA, you can win with a lot of creative athletic guards it's harder to win in the ACC with that approach to basketball. What does Boo think about that? What does Kevin think about that? Some coaches are willing to pivot and say, yeah, I need to reevaluate certain things from my staff to my X's and O's. And certainly, guys, I'll end on this. All schools we follow are headed for a fascinating conversation. Now, Coach being the longtime Santa Clara guy, it would not have impacted him as much in that context, or even Kevin Keats at UNC Wilmington, which doesn't have football. When we get to this new world later this calendar year for the first time in NCAA history, assuming a judge approves the House lawsuit settlement, $20+ million is going to be available from inside the athletic department to sprinkle among all of your teams and athletes. How will the debate go when Dave Doran says to Boo Corrigan, I need a big chunk of that change to be competitive and relevant in the ACC? And then Kevin Keats is going to Boo Corrigan and saying, I need my chunk to be competitive in the ACC and men's basketball. And then more than a dozen other coaches in sports that don't turn profits are saying, well, we need at least a little. If, Elliot Avent's run a heck of a baseball program, he wants something at NC State. So how do those decisions get made? And guys, there's always the scenario, if this House settlement is approved, book it. We are going to see more examples where coaches choose to leave for reasons related to the athletic department's decisions on the questions that I'm raising. Again, I don't know which way it's going to go. There might be an athletic director that says, hey, football's our biggest moneymaker. You get 60% of all our name, image, likeness money. Men's basketball, you're kind of second in line. You get 25%. And hey, all you other sports on campus, collectively, you get 15%. It could be a lot less than that. But let's not forget, and it's specific to NC State, when Herb Sendek concluded that he was not appreciated enough after going to 5 straight NCAA tournaments as the head coach of the Wolfpack in men's basketball. And he didn't like the way fans talked about him and treated him and his family. I had a front row seat for a lot of that craziness. I personally witnessed Wolfpack fans cursing him as he was walking out of the ACC tournament. Guy who took him to 5 straight NCAA tournaments. I'm personally aware of his family being harassed at grocery stores. That's one set of reasons. Could Kevin Keats say they've already forgotten I took him to 2 straight NCAA tournaments? Could Kevin Keats say, remember the 1 year COVID, there was no tournament. So in his 8-year tenure, he's taken him to 3 NCAA tournaments out of 7, and he had other postseason trips beyond that. You know, did they forget that just because I crashed back to earth this year? And maybe he doesn't like the answer to how much NIL money you're going to get. And by the way, there's outside money that's not going to go away. How much support does Wolfpack men's basketball have from third-party NIL? We talked on previous shows. The Wolfpack needed to capitalize in the transfer portal on their greatest postseason since the 1980s. Did they? They got 5 transfers and 2 worked out. Marcus Hill's a good player, not an elite player. Dontrez Styles, formerly of UNC and Georgetown, good player, not an elite player. When I fill out that 15-man All-ACC ballot, there's not going to be a Wolfpack player on there. Are there nice players? Yes. But Duke's got several All-ACC guys. Clemson has multiple All-ACC guys. Louisville has multiple All-ACC guys. They're the 3 teams that are going to the NCAA tournament. You can't have just a bunch of nice players. You need some great players. And then you need to coach them up beyond that. And, of course, none of that happened at NC State this year. That's why we're asking these questions. But I don't think NC State's, ready to drop the guillotine on Kevin Keats, although he would enter next season realizing that he can't have 2 years like this in a row, or his head would be on the chopping block.
As a former AD, I can tell you that if I'm Boo Corrigan, what I'm most concerned about right now is not Kevin Keats or Dave Doran. It's about how the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is able to put all that money into football and all that money into basketball, hiring GMs and all these other staffs, and I'm not. Because he's not only behind the SEC and the Big Ten as a member of the ACC, but NC State Athletics is also now behind their own cousin, brother, whatever you want to call it, over in Chapel Hill in terms of spending on athletics, and the revenues aren't too terribly different outside of the NCAA basketball tournament shares. And both teams have been to Final Fours within the last few years, so that's not too terribly different. So that right there is a big thing that perhaps we will have to do our deep dive on in the weeks and months ahead.
Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas and Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Let's move ahead and talk about the Duke Blue Devils. We've talked about them nonstop over the past few weeks. They are the #1 team in the Atlantic Coast Conference. But Kerry, DG, all of a sudden, Jon Scheyer's Blue Devils are getting beat up in the front court, in the back court, support players. I mean, this team is starting to get worn down maybe a little bit, and they are being injured. Maybe not season-ending injuries, but definitely things that are making them be more creative in their lineups. Now, they'll have a big game against Wake Forest and another big game against North Carolina this week, but how much of a concern is that, David Glenn, for Jon Scheyer going into March?
Yeah, I'm glad I get to go first on this one because I'd love to plant a seed for when Coach Keating jumps in. Specifically through his coach's eyes, how much it matters that players miss practice for injury reasons. Because in my 38 years doing this stuff, my eyes have been opened many times by perspectives that coaches I respect provide where maybe my assumption was not correct. So I look forward to his part of this answer. But I'll say this, whether you look at any ACC championship team or any team that's won the national title, Duke included, they not only had, of course, superstar players. I mean, there's this massive connection between NBA caliber talent and being able to win the NCAA title that I've explored through articles and some of our videos. And I mean, I'm going back 70 years. You better have NBA caliber dudes if you want to compete for an NCAA title. The evidence is just overwhelming for that to back up that statement. But you also need some role players. And the reality is that after Duke's starting lineup, which is young, there are only 4 full-time starters in the entire freshman class in the ACC this year. 3 of them are at Duke, and Cooper Flagg, Con Knueppel, and the big guy Kamen Malawach. So you're young and you need support, no matter how talented you are. Well, their best off-the-bench player is Malik Brown, now out for the second stretch and missing practice time. Another really good player for them, in this case a starter, is Tyrese Proctor. Now, they do say both of these guys are going to be back, but when are they going to be back? And at what percent? Is he going to have a bulky shoulder buckle, on Malik Brown that may limit him in some way? How close to 100% will Tyrese Proctor be? These are important players. So I would be nervous as a coach, in part because Caleb Foster off the bench is an up and down guy. I would not consider him uber reliable as a sophomore. Patrick Gongbo, one of their top big guys off the bench, certainly a promising prospect, but only relatively recently, has he been getting significant minutes. Mason Gillis, the Purdue transfer, is a nice player, but, nice three-point shooter, 3-and-D type guy, but not, maybe you could say he's consistent because of experience, but if I were John Shire, I would want more predictability, more reliability off the bench. Right now, the guy we talked about last week, Isaiah Evans, the freshman, who seriously might turn his late part of his freshman year explosion into first-round NBA draft status. It could happen this year. The young man from the Fayetteville area who played high school ball near Charlotte, if he continues on his current path, that's a great weapon for John Shire, usually off the bench, maybe in the starting role. I think he was plugged into the starting lineup recently for one game because of the injuries. But I don't think you want Isaiah Evans taking more shots than Cooper Flagg, which I think happened, in one of his recent games. Like, you got to cultivate a new chemistry with Isaiah Evans going from a few minutes months ago to being maybe the most important guy off the bench now. I mean, I love his productivity. I love his three-point stroke. I love his confidence, his swagger. But the young man also needs to be reminded that that Cooper Flagg guy needs to be the starting point for everything that Duke does. And even Isaiah Evans probably shouldn't be taking 15 to 18 shots in any game unless it's some kind of runaway Duke victory.
Davey talked about managing these guys as you get later in the season. When you take a look at Duke's roster and you hit the nail on the head, obviously, with Isaiah Evans working his way into starter-type minutes as a de facto sixth starter. It just so happened that Tyrese Proctor's stretch of 37 straight starts back to last year, broken with the knee injury, and obviously they expect to have him back. But that's just one of the possibilities that they're going to have to replace. And the one that they can't afford to replace and have no replacement for, as you mentioned, is Flagg. As it relates to trying to balance it out in practice, from our perspective, and again, I was fortunate enough to coach as a head coach teams that played all the way to April twice. We actually won the CIT and the CBI, although people nowadays are like, what the hell acronym is that? Well, it was a postseason tournament. We had to keep playing and practicing. But we had an early conference tournament at the WCC back then for TV purposes. When ESPN and everyone else was jockeying for putting on these events, they couldn't all put them on the same week. The WCC fell a week early. So we actually ended our season a week before. So we had to wait 2 weeks to start for the beginning of postseason. And then we had another 2.5-week run a month after we were done. By that time, you're basically conditioning. You're keeping your conditioning up. You still want to stay sharp by being able to kind of implement some things. And for us, maybe it was a tweak here or there for our defensive stuff. And that certainly happened with a senior laden and upperclassman laden team we had in winning the 2013 CBI by changing a little bit of defense. But that was because we had that time. We actually had extra time in 2 weeks to put that in, but we're not going to be doing any real heavy contact. I will say this, though, as I think about it, and maybe this was my naivete as a young coach. We played the CIT year mostly on the road and actually finished that by winning at Iona. The beauty of those games from a coach's perspective was they weren't neutral site games. They certainly weren't NCAA games or even an NIT game, although the NIT has shifted to on-campus sites. We had to go to other places. We had to win at San Francisco. We had to win at SMU. We had to win at Wright State. At Purdue, we won at Purdue when you beat Matt Painter in Mackey. We had to win at George Mason to win the CBI, but the CIT one in 2011 was at Iona, and it was the last week of March. And of course, Iona for me is back home. It's in the tri-state area. I grew up in New York and New Jersey area. I had a lot of friends coming to that game, but a lot of the coaching friends I had came to practice the day before our final game. And I remember one coach in particular who was one of my coaches when I played at Seton Hall, Bruce Hamburger, one of the greatest tacticians that have ever lived. He's one of those under the radar guys, never elevated to a very high level, but was a guy that was a high level assistant. And I never forget this after practice. He's like, holy crap, you guys go that hard all the time? I didn't even realize it. We were so juiced up to play in the final game, but we had been practicing like it was October. And that was one of the beauties of that team. But when I look back on it, I'm like, oh man, thank goodness. I mean, we were going at it, diving on loose balls, blocking guys out. You know, like we didn't know. And maybe again, that was my naivete of being a first-time head coach in a postseason event. We certainly did not do that 2 years after in the CBI, although we had to play some extra games in a best-of-3 series with George Mason and had to travel back and forth in between. You try to manage that down. You're usually 2.5 hours in the beginning of the season. By the time you're getting to February, certainly to March, you're not really going live for more than 10, 20 minutes at a time. Some key things, maybe you have your scout team in there. I'll say this also, too. We had a season-ending injury at UCLA when one of our starters in a walkthrough stepped on the foot of a walk-on in a walkthrough. Oh. Things can happen anytime, anywhere. If you go into that trying to avoid injury, that's usually when it happens in the practices. So you kind of just don't want them to change because the players, especially younger ones, they don't really know how to adjust to that. The older guys kind of do, the vets do. I think in the case of Duke, you're treading lightly now that these injuries have happened in games. You need to have them back for what's going to be a stretch run. You got to think they're going to play in the ACC final, and by all accounts, are going to at least play 4, if not 5 or 6 games in March, right? So this is still and you think about that now, guys. 20, 30 games, you got another possibly 10 more to go, right? As long as the season are, it gets condensed at the end of the season because you got Thursday, Saturday, Friday, Sunday. You have, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, ACC tournament. You have to be really detailed, and you really got to trust your preparation up until that point. There isn't a lot of wiggle room to change a lot of things, but I think the number one thing, and this is really important for Duke, is that managing practice and managing guys not doing anything crazy in practice so that they're all hands on deck for games is of primary importance. I think this thing is going to be the number one issue going forward for Duke is if they can stay healthy, because they've seen the replacement for Evans for Proctor for a little bit, but not every guy looks like Malik Brown. Not every guy is 6'9" with that type of body experience, and certainly no one else is Cooper Flagg. It'll be the only thing that can derail them potentially for some crazy day happening where they can't make it and the other team can't miss, of them not getting to the Final Four at some point, having a chance to cut down the nets at the end of the season.
That's our weekly look at the Duke Blue Devils, and it's brought to you by Stiefel and the Founders Group. Our final topic of the week is brought to you by Jimmy's 365 days a year of live music in Wrightsville Beach. Follow them at Jimmy's WB on Instagram. It is a party every day of the year at Jimmy's. Let's shift our attention now to recruiting and how it's changed in college basketball and college football. Nowadays, high school senior hotshots are not being valued as much as veteran players available in the portal.
Well, we're not recruiting any high school basketball players. Not this year. We've already recruited Ruben, Lefty, Come on, we're building from that. This year, we're not even looking at a high school basketball player because we're losing Davon, Kadari, and Aaron. You can't replace them with high school kids.
Let me make this public service announcement to every single high school recruit that's around the world. The biggest, and I mean the absolute biggest threat to you guys has been the transfer portal, whether you want to believe it or not. When I was growing up and when I was getting recruited, yeah, the onus was on, hey, being a 5-star recruit. Hey, yeah, I got this or yeah, I got that. Man, I had a kid over the weekend, we played in the tournaments, talking to another kid, talking about, boy, I got 62 offers.
How many schools can you go to?
Like, you only can go to one.
Well, shit, now you can go to 4.
Now you can go to 62, damn
You
it.
probably can go to 62.
You feel what I'm saying? Shit. You can spend a semester at a different school.
For real.
For now you can.
Yeah.
But the point of the statement is this. Like, Rick Pitino is a veteran coach. He understands what comes with an entitled ass high school recruit.
Mm-hmm.
He don't want them headaches. His hair is already filled with just for men, hiding that damn gray.
Yeah.
He don't want to have to be able to go into these homes of players that's not trying to better themselves and their households. Because this is the thing. When you're recruiting a person who already knows it's time to perform versus a player who's trying to say, what can y'all give me to perform? It's two different conversations. So high school recruit, basketball, football, baseball, hockey, lacrosse. Understand this. There's this thing called transfer portal that is your nemesis, right? So act accordingly. Coaches never really needed you. And it's all a conditional relationship. Under the right conditions is the reason why they're recruiting you like they're recruiting you. You don't know unconditional love. It's everything in life has a transaction attached to it.
Straight up, Kerry Keating, is this a good thing or a bad thing for the game? And does this put more emphasis on an NBA-style front office in college basketball?
I don't know if we even have a chance to say if it's good or bad. I just think it's the thing. I just think it is what it is. When you look just at the sheer numbers involved in this and how we got to this point, obviously with the O'Bannon case and NIL and then COVID and then transfers and then granting extra years and now the availability of what's essentially a free agent portal. It's not really a transfer portal anymore. It's going to become a free agent portal because I will say this, the lack of regulation in that portal right now has opened up for third parties to befriend some of these players, set a market that's really not a true market, and then utilize that number, which could be different for anybody, right? It doesn't matter how much money you have. If one school has that need for you, and that's the amount of money they're willing to pay, that's all it takes for a market to get set. And that's kind of what has happened here in the last couple of years, specifically this year. And we know the SEC was the biggest beneficiary of that. The stance that Coach Pitino is taking is one that obviously he's at the tail end and really the tail end of his career and taking a complete pro approach to this. Let's not forget, in the time that he had to sit out after leaving Louisville, he went over to Greece and coached in the EuroLeague. And I don't know if you could catch him saying in a recent interview, I'm either going to keep doing this. He may actually go back to the EuroLeague. He is completely and utterly set on he's never going to deal with the old way of recruiting. There'll be no home visits. I'm not running around. Believe me when I tell you, you want to find Rick Pitino in July, it's not going to be in Vegas. It's not going to be in Atlanta. It's not going to be in Indianapolis watching high school kids. It's going to be on the golf course in Florida for 3 straight weeks. Guaranteed. All right. I just know that for a fact. He's not going to stress over going to try to convince some high school kid to come in, largely because he also, specifically Mike and David, doesn't have 5 years left in his career. I don't know if he's going to, now he may defy those odds and still be coaching, but he's certainly not going to do it to develop someone for the next 5 years. He's going to take advantage of kids that are older. He's going to take advantage of kids that are more mature, that have already gone through a process. There's going to be a market set, as we talked about, this $20 million salary cap. Keep in mind, St. John's doesn't have football. It's going to be interesting to see the non-football schools and the majority of that money going to basketball. The talk out in the ether has been the going rate for basketball salary caps is anywhere from 7 to 10 million. 13-7 split maybe from football to basketball. 7 to 10 meaning the 10 on the side of the Marquettes and St. John's, the Big East schools of the world without football. There's not going to be an even playing field until there's some sort of bargaining in place that sets a cap that everyone has to get to and operate from. In the case of Rick Pitino, it ain't going to high school guys. Now, if they're prudent and they're smart, he may actually have someone on his staff. And to transition into your second part of your question, Michael, I absolutely and unequivocally believe that the investment for these, at least the higher level schools that can afford to do it, is to have a staff that is in charge of personnel, of evaluating, of seeing what the value is in those evaluations that fits your roster, whether it's your salary cap, whether it's your roster needs, whether it's availability. Is there 1 year left? Is there 2 year left? Is there development within older guys that we can bring him in to play a role and then he can become a key guy for us after that because he's already 20, 22, 23 years old. The high school guys, there's probably a dozen that will warrant. The Cooper Flags of the world, the guy going to BYU that's going to command millions of dollars out of high school because essentially they are older guys in the sense they'll only be in college for a year. Their age is the only difference in that. I think this is just the way it's going to be right now. I don't know if it's right or if it's wrong, but I do think that you'll start to see a slow build out and in some cases a quicker build out because I think there is a way to take advantage of this a lot quicker now than ever before to elevate yourself. And St. John's has kind of done that at the end of where the coach can do it. And they found the right guys. St. John's is a flawed team in the sense that offensively, they're going to have a really, really hard time scoring points when they need to when they run up against a defense in the NCAA tournament that's as formidable as theirs is. Their defense is very, very formidable. It'll get them to the table. Can their offense get them over the top? That remains to be seen. But they have the coach in place that can coach like this. Not every coach can coach like this. Pitino has siphoned off all the duties to his staff. Now he's able to just coach the team. This is kind of the de facto way of what we're going to have to transition to, the old way to the new way. The only difference being is you still got to get to the tournament at the end and kind of play into those constraints. How you construct your roster nowadays, a ton of moving parts. I've been looking at this personally, trying to put some stuff together. There's anywhere between 30 and 50 data sets to get to factors that you can put into one that can help you determine on an even playing field how guys are valued. It requires a lot of effort and daily evaluation. It'll be interesting to see which team or teams or conferences step up to take advantage of it while conferences still do exist.
Here's the bottom line. 2 decades ago, there would be the occasional major college transfer who was so good that he was a member of that 15-man All-ACC team. So just 2 decades ago, it might be 14 guys that these various coaches recruited out of high school the traditional way, and maybe one transfer back when the rules made transfers sit out a year. Maybe one guy would be good enough to be All-ACC. We're now trending toward 50% of the All-ACC teams are major college transfers. That's not a slight change, right? Now you have to recruit that way, whether Rick Pitino likes it. If somebody doesn't like it, they're risking their jobs by not changing with the times. Whether it's good or bad is really a matter of opinion. I personally am not bothered by these quickly shifting landscapes. I'm happy that young people have opportunities for compensation that they did not have for, 100 years of NCAA history. It doesn't upset me as much as it upsets a lot of the traditionalists. So people can have their own opinions on whether it's good or bad philosophically. But keep in mind, these changes aren't being made out of the goodness of people's hearts. These changes are being made because they keep losing lawsuits. And that's why they're changing the rules. And that's why transfers are immediately eligible. And that's why name, image, likeness is a thing. And that's why the House settlement is a thing. So whether we like it or not, whether we hate it or not, it's the new world. And if you're a fan, you better get used to it. And if you're a coach, you certainly better get used to it. Because not only are almost half the All-ACC players major college transfers, it still means half might be high school signees cultivated and developed over many years. But that landscape has shifted dramatically. And I believe last year's numbers, guys, when you just counted up all ACC basketball signees, I believe, I'll double check this exact number, but it was roughly 2/3 major college transfers and 1/3 high school signees. That is not slightly different than the way we've been doing things for decades. That is a upside down, flip it type of a situation, and it's only going to continue. Why? Because more and more of the best players in America are major college transfers, and fewer of high school seniors are truly ready to do what Cooper Flagg is doing at Duke, even what Con Knippel is doing at Duke, even what Common Malawach is doing at Duke. Those are exceptions, those three guys at Duke who are starting as true freshmen, either out of the high school ranks or, in Malawach's case, as an international signee. Again, only 4 guys in the whole 18-team ACC. What's 18 times 5? That's how many starters there are in the ACC. 4 of those, what is that, 90? 4 of those 90 ACC starters are true freshmen. 4. Where are they coming from? Well, they're often 3rd, 4th, and 5th-year players coming from other major colleges and universities. So that's the present. That's the future. And again, going way back to the very beginning of today's show, just as Cooper Flagg, Prep All-American, and Chase Hunter, 6th-year senior from the high school ranks at Clemson, and Chucky Hepburn, Wisconsin transfer at Louisville, and Maxime Reynaud, international signee from Paris, France, just as those 4 guys personify the 4 main talent pipelines that are feeding college basketball programs, everybody's got to get used to different emphases on those different talent pipelines. And the transfer and international pipelines are only going to grow in number and grow in influence. And all of us media fans, coaches, and otherwise have to get used to all those things.